All right, everybody's favorite thing to talk about, playoff expansion. There's an article out. I'm not going to go through and read the entire article here. It's well, there's several articles out. This one happens to be from Ross Dellinger over at Yahoo Sports, but you can find this information anywhere. Started leaking out over the weekend. I'm not going to go through and read this whole article here. I'll give you kind of the headline, and I'm just going to give you my opinion on it. I will post a link in the article to the article in the description if you do want to read the whole thing. But according to sources, the SEC and the Big Ten are building momentum to further expand the college football playoff to 14 or 16 teams. Now, I know not everybody likes that. There's a lot of people didn't even want to go to 12, but this really shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. This has been talked about since they announced they were going from 4 to 12 3 years ago, whenever they made that initial announcement that they were moving to the 12-team playoff. Before we even had a 12-team playoff, which we just had the first one last year, before we even had one 12-team playoff, you already had reports out about potentially moving to 14, 16, whatever number of teams. So that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that it looks like it's headed that way. Again, I understand there's a lot of people that aren't happy about it, don't like it, don't want it to happen. But let's kind of go through the details of what they're talking about here, because there are some things I'm kind of okay with, some things I'm not, some things I'm totally against, and I think is really bad for the direction and the future of football. Let's start with sort of the overarching premise here, which is the SEC and the Big Ten are going to run college football. That's just what's going to happen. Now, this may come as a surprise to some people watching this video because, of course, I'm a college football fan, but Georgia's my favorite team. I don't hide that. I also don't hide the fact that I'm sort of an SEC homer in that, you know, I like when the SEC does well as a whole in football. You know, I would rather Alabama beat Michigan last year in the bowl game than lose to Michigan, right? Even though I hate Alabama because I'm a Georgia fan, and Georgia can't beat Alabama to save their life. So it's a weird thing. But I don't think college football should be boiled down to just the SEC or just the Big Ten or just the SEC and the Big Ten, and then everyone else is sort of like considered beneath that. Now, I understand, I'm not an idiot. The SEC and the Big Ten, generally speaking, not every year, but generally over the last 20 years, have been the two best football conferences. There have been years that you can find, particularly with the ACC, where maybe they had a better year than one or both of those other leagues. And I'm not taking anything away from the ACC. But, you know, if you've been watching college football over the last 20 years or so, it's been the SEC sort of at the top most years, Big Ten right on their heels. I think right now the Big Ten is better than the SEC. But that's part of my point here. Do we want to make permanent changes to college football, how it's structured, how it works, and who's in charge based on which leagues are better today? In other words, if we had gone through all of this 25 years ago, would the Big East be in charge of football? Would the ACC? What about the Pac-12? There are periods of time throughout the history of college football where different conferences are sort of at the top of the pecking order. You know, and while it's true that the SEC and the Big Ten appear to be at the top of that pecking order now and in the near past, and when I say near past, 15, 20 years, as opposed to the 120-odd year history of college football, yes, the SEC and the Big Ten have been at the top of the pecking order. But, you know, will that stay the same forever? Well, I mean, we don't know. I mean, what we do know is that it's never stayed the same before. Right? So I don't know if we should be making permanent sort of universe-altering decisions, college football universe-altering decisions, based on which conference or two conferences happen to be better at football today than some other conference. I don't understand, and this is a point I've made for a long time, when I would sort of beat the SEC drum about how I thought they were the best football conference and all that. I don't know what the point of being the best conference is if somehow there aren't any other conferences to play and then beat, right? Or potentially lose to, or whatever the case. Like, one of the things that has made sort of the SEC flag waving as big as it is, and here's the thing, people either love the SEC flag waving or they really hate it. There's nobody that is indifferent on it. So even if you're one of the people that hates sort of the SEC flag waving that's gone on over the last 10 or 15 years or so, even if you hate it, you know about it, you have an opinion about it, it's sort of part of college football. But one of the things I've been saying about that for a long time is, what's the point of saying you're the best at something if you're not beating anyone else to prove it? And I know the Big Ten is involved in this. It's not just the SEC, but still, you know, I didn't want the Pac-12 to go away. I definitely don't want the ACC or the Big 12 to go away. And to be clear, that's not what is happening, at least now, with these proposed changes. But it's a fear that I have moving forward. You look at what's going on, particularly in the ACC. You got teams that hate their own league. They want out. They're suing everybody. I don't want to see the leagues go away. I didn't want to see the Pac-12 go away. Again, I think the SEC is better football than the ACC. I think the SEC was better football than the Pac-12. But how do you prove that? By beating the ACC or the Pac-12. If there is no ACC or Pac-12 or Big 12, whatever. So it's not really contradicting ideas. I think some people take what I say the wrong way. Like, I think it's the SEC and nothing else. And nothing could be further from the truth. I watched more Big 12 this past season than probably any other conference other than the SEC. It was great football. Now, I think the SEC and the Big Ten as a whole were better than the Big 12, but when you were watching Big 12 games, those were great games. The last month of the season, there was 6 or 7 teams still alive to win the Big 12, which meant there were 6 or 7 teams in the Big 12 still alive to make the playoff. I thought it was great and exciting football. You had some star names out there with Deion Sanders at Colorado, Shador and Travis Hunter, Scattaboo at Arizona State. I mean, it was a really entertaining league. I don't need the Big 12 to be as good top to bottom as the SEC or the Big 10 is in order to enjoy watching Big 12 football games. On top of that, who am I going to brag to about the SEC being good if there's no Big 12 or ACC to play? So let's get to the article, because again, I feel like I'm getting ahead here. The article is not suggesting that those leagues will go away, but you'll see in a minute here, all of the power is shifting to the SEC and the Big Ten. And so it almost looks inevitable at this point that those other leagues will at some point go away. And you're going to be left with basically the SEC and the Big Ten, the NFL, basically AFC. You know, the NFL's got the AFC and the NFC. College football is going to have the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't want that. I'm not in favor of that. I would push against that. But it looks like that's the direction the tide is moving towards. But anyway, let me go through some of the highlights of this article here. I'm just going to kind of give you the sort of general breakdown. Again, the exact article, the link to the article will be in the description if you want to read the whole thing. So, well, here's what you need to know first off. The SEC and the Big Ten combined have complete control and authority over what happens to the playoffs. The ACC, the Big 12, and the Group of Five ceded that authority to the SEC and the Big 10. The SEC and the Big 10 didn't necessarily take that authority. They didn't get together, just them two, and go, we're going to make all the rules, and if everyone else wants to come along again. It didn't exactly go down that way, but it basically went down that way. The SEC and the Big 10 basically threatened to just walk away from the other two conferences unless you let us do what we want. So whatever changes. In the past, when we voted to move from 4 teams to 12 teams, when we voted to originally go to 4 teams, everyone had to agree. It had to be all 10 conference commissioners and the athletic director of Notre Dame in order to move from 4 to 12 teams. That's sort of the way it's been. It's no longer that way. The SEC and the Big 10 get to make the decisions. They get to put out the proposal. And then if the ACC, the Big 12, the Group of Five, Notre Dame, whoever want to come along, they're welcome to do that. But they don't have any decision-making authority, which is another thing I disagree with. I think all conferences should be equal when it comes to making decisions about the future of college football, but that's not where we are. So what the SEC and the Big Ten are putting forward is a move to either a 14 or a 16-team playoff. These are sort of the highlights right here. It's either going to be 14 teams or 16 teams. What's the difference between the two? If we go to a 14-team playoff, there will be 2 byes. Only 2 teams will get a bye. If we go to a 16-team playoff, 0 teams will get a bye. And the reason for that is if you start with 14, right? Let's say you don't have any byes, okay? And you start with 14. Well, after the first round, how many teams are you left with? 7. Well, you can't have a playoff with 7 teams. There's no way to play down from 7. Okay, so they would have to implement 2 byes, and that's what they're going to do if they decide to go with a 14-team playoff. If they go with a 16-team playoff, nobody will get a bye. You'll start with 16. You'll play down to 8, then 4, then 2, then 1. So that's the differences between the 14 and the 16-team model. Who's going to get in? This is where people are going to get upset. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to be guaranteed, no matter what, 4 teams in the playoff each. 4 each. SEC 4, Big Ten 4. Now, they could potentially get more, but they're going to get at least 4 each in every year. So keep that number in mind based on the 14 or the 16-team playoff. Let's start with the 14 team. So if the SEC gets 4 and the Big Ten gets 4, that's 8 of the 14 teams, right? The ACC and the Big 12 guaranteed 2 teams each. 2. All right, so that's 4 from the SEC, 4 from the Big Ten. That gets us to 8. 2 from the ACC gets us to 12. 2 from the Big 12. I'm sorry, 2 from the math is hard, woo. 4 each for the SEC and the Big Ten. That's 8. 2 for the ACC. That makes 10. 2 for the Big 12. That makes 12. There's 2 spots left. Who gets the last 2 spots? Notre Dame is guaranteed a spot somewhere in the top 14. If they finish in the top 14. And this will be based off of the playoff ranking put out by the College Football Playoff Committee every week at the end of the year. If Notre Dame is ranked anywhere 1 to 14, they're guaranteed a spot somewhere in that 14-team playoff. That gets us to 13 teams. Who would be the 14th team? Highest ranked Group of 5 champion. So in a 14-team model, the College Football Playoff Committee is really only picking 1 team, technically, and that's Notre Dame if they're in the top 14. So if Notre Dame's in the top 14, they're really not picking any teams. It's going to be the top 4 SEC, the top 4 Big 10, the top 2 ACC, the top 2 Big 12, and Notre Dame, highest ranked Group of 5 champion, that's 14 teams. If Notre Dame is not ranked in the top 14, then you have a 1 extra spot left to fill. It would be the highest ranked team that's not already in. Does that make sense? So in that scenario, the SEC could potentially get 5, or the Big 10 could potentially get 5, or the ACC could get 3, or the Big 12 could get 3. That's how that would work. If it goes to 16, everything is the same with more at-large teams. So the SEC would still get 4, the Big 10 would still get 4, the ACC 2, the Big 12 2. That gets us to 12 teams. If Notre Dame is ranked in the top 16, they get in. That puts you at 13 teams. The highest ranked Group of 5 champion would put you at 14. The highest 2 ranked teams after that, according to the playoff ranking, would get in at 15 and 16. So that's how the breakdown would work. 14-team playoff, 2 teams get a bye, 16-team playoff, nobody gets a bye. That's a lot. Again, the article is in the description. You can read it. Maybe it's easier for you to read it rather than listen to me try to break it down. But let's pull up the final college football playoff ranking of this last year and see what would change, what would be different, what would have happened if we would have been operating under this 14 or 16 team scenario that's been put out this last season, okay? And remember, the last playoff ranking that the playoff committee puts out is after conference championship weekend. More on that in a second, because that is potentially changing as well. The SEC could be going to 9 conference games, which would make a lot of people, myself included, happy. So there are some changes to conference championship weekend and conference scheduling built into this new playoff format that we'll get to in a second. But first, let's just look at the final playoff ranking, which comes out after conference championship weekend. Okay, so Oregon is the winner of the Big Ten, and the 1 seed, or the number 1 ranking, would have got in. Georgia is the winner of the SEC, would have got in. You got to go all the way down now to Boise State as the highest ranked Group of 5 team, would have got in. Clemson all the way down here at 16, but an ACC champion, would have got in. And then you'd have the Big 12 champion, Arizona State, at 12 that would have got in. So that would have been your 4 major conference winners plus Boise State. That would have put us at 5 teams. Now, remember, in the new format, the SEC and the Big 10 are guaranteed to get 4 in. So let's start with the SEC. Georgia at 2 automatically gets in as the winner of the SEC. Texas, the loser of the SEC championship game, automatically gets in as the SEC 2. It then goes to the highest ranked SEC teams after that to fill out the 4 SEC teams. That would have been Tennessee and Alabama. So if we were in a 14-team playoff that they're looking to move to, and by the way, this wouldn't start till 2026. So this isn't happening this year. 2025, it's going to be the same 12-team playoff we saw last year. Whatever changes they go with, whether it be 14 or 16, is not going to happen until the 2026 season. But your 4 SEC teams would have been Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, and Bama. Your 4 Big 10 teams, Oregon as the Big 10 champion, would have got in. They defeated Penn State. So Penn State would have got in as the 2nd-seeded Big 10 team. Ohio State is the next highest-ranked Big 10 team. They would have got in, and then Indiana after that. So everything would have been the same for the Big 10. The Big 10 got 4 teams in last year, these same 4 teams. So it wouldn't have affected, at least not yet, which Big 10 teams got in. It would have been those 4. Then you move to the ACC, who's guaranteed to get 2 teams in. The ACC champion, which was Clemson, it's down here at 16. And the team they beat in the ACC championship, and the 2nd highest rated ACC team, SMU. So no changes there. Clemson and SMU got in last year. They would have got in the new format as well. Then you move to the Big 12. This is where somebody gets an additional team in here. Well, the SEC already got the SEC got 3 teams in last year's 12-team playoff. They would have got 4 had we been operating under this new format. The 4th would have been Alabama. The Big 12, Arizona State was the lone Big 12 team to get in as the winner of the Big 12 conference championship game. If you scroll down, now this is where it gets interesting. So they beat Iowa State, right, in the Big 12 championship game. But look at the final ranking. BYU is ranked ahead of Iowa State. This is why the conferences are looking to change how they do conference championship weekend to prevent this from happening. BYU in this scenario is benefiting by not playing in the Big 12 title game, and Iowa State is getting punished in this scenario by playing in the Big 12 title game, right? So this is where they're looking to change some of the conference championship stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute. Notre Dame, remember, Notre Dame in the new format, Notre Dame gets in if they're ranked anywhere in the top 14. Well, they're ranked 5. Obviously, they would have got in, and they did. So that would have been your 4 SEC teams, your 4 Big 10 teams, your 2 ACC, your 2 Big 12, Notre Dame and Boise State. That's 4, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14. That would have been your 14-team playoff. If it went to 16, it would be the next 2 highest ranked teams that aren't already in. So Oregon's already in, Georgia, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tennessee, Indiana, Boise, SMU. Bama is in as part of the 4 SEC teams. Arizona State was automatically in. So Miami would have been in, and Ole Miss would have been in. That's who would have got in, right? Yeah, Miami and Ole Miss, if they go to 16, would have got in last year. So that's how it, in theory, would work. The playoffs, conference championship weekend. It started with the ACC a couple of weeks ago, but these conferences are beginning to talk about, instead of just having a conference championship game, having a conference championship tournament involving 4 teams. All 4 teams from the SEC and the Big 10 that make the conference tournament, those 4 teams, are guaranteed a spot in the playoff. Win, lose by 100, quarterback gets hurt, doesn't matter. The 4 teams that make the conference tournament from the SEC and the Big 10 each would get into the playoff, win, lose, no matter what. That is to prevent teams or conferences from doing away or opting out of conference championship games in fear of being punished by the playoff committee for losing a game that somebody else didn't have to play. The BYU Arizona State scenario right over here, okay? Or BYU Iowa State scenario right over here. So those 4 teams would get in. The winner would be the conference champion and would be ranked higher than the other as far as the seeding goes, but you wouldn't be punished for participating in the conference championship tournament, which would be 4 teams, 2 games, 2 semifinals and a final. And the conferences would work the conference championship games that way to prevent teams from. Remember last year there was the idea was floated that maybe a team just shouldn't play in the conference championship game. Why risk losing? We're already ranked in the top 10. We're going to get in the playoffs 100% if we don't play in the conference championship game. If we play in the conference championship game and lose, we might get left out. So why should we play? It almost happened to SMU. SMU was ranked in the top 10, but then lost to Clemson in the ACC championship game. And you guys remember that next day, there was a lot of speculation whether Alabama would jump SMU. Alabama didn't play in a conference championship game. They didn't have an opportunity to lose that day, whereas SMU did, and did lose to Clemson. The committee ended up putting SMU in over Alabama, which I think was the right thing to do. But these changes as far as how the conference championship games are played out and the guarantee that the 4 teams involved in that conference championship tournament at the end of the year all get into the playoffs is a way to protect the conference championship games, to keep them from going away, to keep teams from opting out of conference championship games, so forth and so on. Now, I don't even like talking about this shit, okay? I mentioned this the other day on the general manager video. I like watching college football and reacting to it. I like talking about a team's quarterback and whether or not I think he's going to be really good or terrible. I like talking about why a head coach shouldn't be somewhere and he should have been fired, but he's not, or this team needs to go get that coach or whatever. I like talking about, I don't even like talking about this shit. But the last 3 or 4 years, every single offseason has been nothing but this. There's not really one particular change in college football that's been made that I think is like, oh, that's it. That was like, that's too much. That's a bridge too far. They crossed the line now. To me, it's not about any one change that's been made. It's the total number of changes that have happened in a relatively short period of time. Even if you want to go back to the first year of the 12-team playoff, which was 10 years ago. In the last 10 or 11 years, there have been more changes to the foundation and the core of what college football is than in the 100 years before that. Now, there have been some landmark changes over the course of time when it comes to college football, desegregation being at the top of the list. But the TV contracts becoming a thing in the 80s and 90s was huge for college football. The scholarship limit, when that was first implemented at 85, huge change for college football. There's been several sort of milestone changes in college football that have fundamentally altered the way college football is played, so forth and so on. But at no point in the history of college football have we had a 10-year period like we are in right now. Starting in 2014, they moved to a 4-team playoff. Not even 10 years later, really about 7 or 8 years into the 4-team playoff, they start talking about going to 12. They then go to 12. And before the 12-team playoff is even played, they're talking about expanding to 14 or 16, NIL, transfer portal stuff, the House settlement that allows universities or requires universities actually to now pay the players directly up to $20 million a year. There have been so many changes in the world of college football. To me, that is more of a problem than any one individual in particular change. Does it really make that big of a difference to me whether they go from 12 to, whether they stay with a 12-team playoff or go to 14? I don't particularly care. I don't think that's earth-shattering. I don't think that's going to shake the foundation of college football to go from 12 to 14. Okay. My issue is that we've only had 1 year of 12 and you already want to go to 14 or 16 on top of the fact that you just put NIL in, you just put the transfer portal in. We just got a 4-team playoff 10 years ago. The SEC and the Big Ten are getting bigger and richer while everybody else is getting smaller and poorer. What's going to happen to the ACC, the Big 12, conference realignment, conference expansion? We used to have divisions. Now we don't have divisions. Probably going back to divisions because the conferences are so big now. You have to have divisions to separate out the teams. It's one thing after another. And I don't it's the cumulative effect to me that is not ruining college football. That's that's the easy thing to do, is to come on here and yell, oh, they're ruining college football. Yeah, forget it. It's NFL light. No, this is terrible. It's not ruining college football. I'm obviously still going to watch it. Tons of people watched it last season. Last season was the most watched college football season in the history of college football. So I'm not going to overreact or get all dramatic with they've ruined college football. It's not the same. College football is dead. Not going to do that. But man, this is a lot of change in a short period of time. And I get tired of talking about this kind of stuff. And I almost didn't make this video today just because I don't want to talk about it. It's just a general manager thing from the other day. I logged on to ESPN this morning, and the first thing I see on there is Virginia Tech hires Montgomery as an offensive coordinator, and ex-Irish DC Golden named Broyles Award winner, and Notre Dame hiring Lyons Martin as general manager. I mean, this is what it's come down to every offseason. We're going to get a million articles this offseason about Florida State, their lawsuits against the ACC and ESPN and everybody else that they're suing. And are they leaving the ACC or are they not? If they are leaving, when are they leaving? How much do they have to pay to get out? Which conference are they going to go to? I don't like talking about any of that shit. I like talking about college football. Anyway, 12-team playoff. What'd you think about it? We're either going to 14 or 16. Not this year. 2025, this season, will be a 12-team playoff again. But after that, 2026 forward, it's either going to be 14 or 16. The SEC and the Big Ten are in charge. They have decision-making authority, not the ACC or the Big 12. So the SEC can do what the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get together. They're going to come up with a playoff format. And if the other conferences want to participate, fine. If they don't, I guess that's fine too. Not fine to me, but that's what the SEC and the Big Ten are doing. I don't like it. But, unfortunately, they don't call and ask me my opinion. They should, but they don't. Have a good morning.